Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Indieheads podcast. I am your host, not Maddie, not Monrovian Prince on Twitter. It's your pal Dill, and today we have a really special episode in the Indieheads podcast. We have a wonderful guest on stage, but before we get into it, let me introduce our other main hitters. We got our beautiful boy Jackson,
Hello, it's Jackson at horse_jeans at twitter.com. Very excited for this episode today.
and we got our gorgeous gal Nat.
Hello, Nat here at Framing the Pick on Twitter, and also really excited to delve into this discussion.
And also joining us today, we have filmmaker, artist, and a very good friend of mine, Mr. David Venable. David, this is your Indie Heads podcast debut. Welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. It's an honor. That Twitter is at David A.L. Venable, because apparently the only other David Venable is a QVC host. Don't want to be confused with that. No, this is a big deal for me as well because Daughters is and has been one of my favorite bands, if not my favorite band, for quite a while now. So,
David,
yes.
some people that we know would describe you probably as a goth dad. Would you say so?
I think it's fairly accurate. The dad part, God, I hope not. But there's one of my favorite quotes is from Jonan Vasquez, the creator of Invader Zim, where someone said, someone would call you a goth king, and he said, "King may be goth, that's just arrogant." And that's kind of how I would describe myself, I'd say.
Yeah. You dress in all black. You're very brooding and slightly intimidating in person. And I feel like you are the absolute perfect guest to be on our discussion for this episode. We're talking about Daughters, the band, beautiful band Daughters, specifically their self-titled record from 2010. But also we're talking about a larger overview of the band itself, its history, its other albums, all leading up into this just magnanimous, terrifying wall of sound that we have here. But David, I'll start off with you and just let you go more into detail about your history with Daughters and the band and how you got into them.
Absolutely. So I have been sort of following Daughter's career from the start. One thing that I absolutely love about the band is that their sonic evolution has kind of run directly in sync with my tastes. So I'm of the era of like the Scene Kids and kind of the grindcore bands. And that's kind of how they started out, of course, with Canada Songs was like a straight grindcore, scene core, heavy sound. And then, I kind of grew out of that a little bit. And so did they at the same time, started getting into more like noise music, kind of like, Jesus Lizard and, Shellac and, Scratched Acid. And they kind of started getting more and more into that with Alexis dropping the growls and the screams and kind of just going for that, wailing preacher sound. And then they dived even further into that with the self-titled before kind of getting into kind of a industrial death album that you could call you won't get what you want, but they've kind of been there as a constant, and it's really interesting how their evolution is consistently great. There's not really any missteps. It's just a fascinating development all the way from Canada Songs to You Won't Get What You Want. But yeah.
Beautiful. Nat, I'll turn it over to you. What was your introduction with Daughters and your relationship with the band?
Yeah, I think I have a nice little counterpoint because I am a relative newcomer to Daughters, having just jumped on You Won't Get What You Want, but I feel like that album provided me with just the right kind of like entry point because it was it was coming out right when I was getting more heavily invested in like industrial music and noise rock and no wave and all these different subgenres that you could feel kind of like the tendrils of that album kind of spooling off into. And I really from there delved into the back catalog, and this particular album, the self-titled one, was the one that like in the back catalog always stood out to me just for how concise it is and how it kind of feels like, as we'll probably get into, like the natural kind of like stepping stone to getting to where they got post reunion, but also kind of has its own singular identity in their discography.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, hell yeah, hell yeah. Jackson, I think you're in sort of a similar boat, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
You kind of also jumped on with "You Won't Get What You Want."
Yeah, I think I had maybe heard the self-titled like once before, but like when You Won't Get What You Want came out and that record made the kind of impact it did, I very much jumped on the bandwagon, and that record was my second favorite album of the year that year. And honestly, it might have passed the Foxing album in my mind. Like that back in those two are really neck and neck there, but that is like one of my favorite albums of the 2010s, one of my favorite albums period. And after getting really into that record, I, of course, as Nat did, like started going through the back catalog, listened to Daughters, listened to Hell songs, listened to Canada songs. And I went to, luckily I managed to sneak in 2 Daughters shows before the pandemic struck, because Daughters was the very last show I saw before live music was canceled. And so I really love this band a lot, and I think that I'm very excited to, as we're discussing, like talk through their discography and specifically go back, because I think a lot of people have listened to You Won't Get What You Want and like get the gist of it, but I think this record in particular, even though I still think You Won't Get What You Want is my favorite, I think that the self-titled scratches like a different kind of itch, and I think serves it is so good at doing what it's trying to do, which is different than every single Daughters album is different. Like they really do evolve and change and build upon their sound with every record. And I think Daughters, kind of, as we'll probably discuss, exists in this kind of perfect midpoint between the past, present, and future of Daughters, where it's more ambitious and more built out than the early grindcore albums, but it is also has that intensity and that like balls to the wall, like no breaks, no slowing down, all assault that the grindcore records had, but stretched out to 27 minutes instead of 15 minutes. And yeah, I really love this album. Really excited to talk about it for its, well, it turned 10 years in like March, so we're a little late, but you know, things have been happening. We've been busy.
Time is an illusion, as we have clearly all come to realize over the past few
Yes.
months. A daughter's show being the precursor to quarantine just feels so apt.
No, it was correct. It felt like an apocalyptic show, and then it was appropriate that it was It was a show me the body, proto martyr, Daughters.
Oh, I
And
caught that tour, but Show Me the Body got arrested at the time.
Oh
So they
oh
God.
geez.
put someone else in. But yeah, that was a great concert.
I don't want to stick too much on "You Won't Get What You Want" because obviously that doesn't want to be our main topic of the day. But I want to shoot it back over to David real quick and just get your thoughts on "You Won't Get What You Want." Again, as someone who has been with the band for so long, you know, what were your feelings about that record?
So when I first listened to it, I think the 2 singles that they released, it was Satan in the Wait and what else was it? I can't remember.
I
But
think it was "The Reason They Hate Me."
Yeah.
yes, yeah, it was The Reason They Hate Me and Satan in the Wait. And I remember when I first heard them, I was interested, but I wasn't quite hooked yet. You know, it was one of those things where I was so accustomed to their back catalog. Um, it was almost like once I heard the full album, it recontextualized the tracks in this way that actually made me just fall in love with them entirely. Um, and it's something where you start out with City Song on there, and it's just so heavy and doomy and industrial, and it just really as Dylan said, that's right up my alley. Um, so it was one of those things where I pretty quickly just began to adore it, and it's gone. It's been in my, let's say, like top 50 albums, and it's just gradually climbing its way up further and further every time I listen to it again. It's probably in the top tens, if not top five now. It's just so good. But it is, like we've said, it is this kind of detour that they take, that I think is really fascinating, and I really want to see where it goes from here. Because they may get, it's interesting, they get slower, sort of, but they get, um, maybe not more aggressive, but they get more crushing, I guess you could say. Just really uh, uh, pummeling when it comes down to the emotional content of their albums.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. Um, it's just at the point where they are in their careers. I think "You Won't Get What You Want" definitely feels like the magnum opus in a sort of way,
Yeah,
because it's just so monolithic when you listen to it.
that's a
Uh,
great term for it. Yeah.
yeah, and it's just surprisingly just this very, I guess, accessible record too, saying just how many people, at least on this podcast, were able to jump on that record and then jump into the rest of Daughter's discography kind of pretty easily, I
Yeah,
think.
I think it says a lot about how well executed that album is, that despite the fact that it is still very much like abrasive, unwelcoming music, that like it got not only the critical response, but like every single song on that album has like over 1 million plays on Spotify, which just feels kind of crazy to me. Like
Yeah.
like the fact that I mean I know from personal experience that I do just go around in my normal day listening to Daughters like it's normal, but like imagining that many other people doing it is weird to me for some reason.
I mean, it's a band who has a song called "The Fuck Whisperer," so it's one of those things where I
Yeah.
would never have thought, like, oh yeah, that's gonna be like super popular. That's gonna be like really, really big in a couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, no,
Speaking of the
let's
Fuck Whisperer, why don't we get into the back catalog a little bit and talk a little Hell songs and Canada songs?
hell yeah, hell yeah. I was just about to lead into that. So yes, let's get more into Daughters, more into their early years. But going into the band itself, you got Alexis Marshall on vocals, you got Nick Sadler on the lead guitar, and then you got John, is it Severson?
I think Syverson is what I thought it was, but maybe.
Severson's, yeah. But delving more into the band in their early years, around the time of Canada Songs and their first EP, there seems to be a lot of turnover
Yeah.
with other members of the band. So let's get into Canada Songs then.
Well, because they all started kind of in a band called As the Sun Sets, which like is pretty good if you're into kind of the Canada Songs sound. As the Sun Sets kind of has a similar kind of intensity, and like John, their drummer, like just kind of really goes off on their stuff there. But like, yeah, that whole era, like I mentioned before, is just again another band with a name that just stretches on. But Canada Songs it's really weird because I know a lot of Daughters fans now, like who got into it with "You Won't Get What You Want," like look back at Canada Songs as a weird kind of novelty, because it's almost like that era was like a you had to be there kind of thing. But
Yeah, because they're coming from, like you said, this grindcore scene. They got parts of math rock in there, and just plain old noise rock as well. And they're going very heavily into this hardcore scene, which again, it's interesting to see that arc kind of start to slide off about around the time of self-titled.
well, what they did apparently it's actually something I find really funny is like the reason that they like kind of stopped playing as intensely because like Canada Songs, like the guitar on that is just so fast, so technical, so complicated that like Nick Sadler literally just said like it hurts my hands and I don't want to play like that anymore. Like that's essentially why they like changed their sound so much, is that he was just sort of like, it sucks to do this. Like I really don't like it. Um,
It's also hilarious though that like Nick Sadler complains about that, but then the stuff he does on this fucking album that we're going to talk about today, like this doesn't exactly seem easy,
no,
even by comparison.
it's not. And I remember, when I was growing up, I tried to learn. I think I tried to learn the song "Nurse, Will You Please Prep the Patient for Sexual Doctor," and like it is just so insanely complicated and yet not. And I, again, like Nick Sadler has like a great quote about that where he said like, we're the Ramones of ugly guitar sounds.
That rules so hard.
It's like once you learn it, because they're playing everything up on like the 14th fret or something, and it's just really dissonant, discordant sounds, but like it's simple if you're really really good at the guitar, I guess is a way to put it. But no, I just think that's really funny. It's the same thing, Alexis changed his vocal style in large part, from Canada Songs to Hell Songs, because he was like, I can't, these guys are really good, and like I don't want to keep just shrieking while they are making actual music, so I'm going to like become an actual singer.
He would have easily thrown his voice out within like 5 years if he kept singing like he did.
That happened to a lot of singers from that era. I mean, I remember reading an article like on similar things where they were talking about emo and screamo and stuff, and they were saying that like a lot of those vocalists, especially like emo vocalists and screamo vocalists, were pushing their vocals to a register that was extremely hard to reach, and it's because they're actually, you have a lot of adrenaline when you're performing, and they're actually utilizing that adrenaline to push their vocal register. And the problem with that is that it's not in their range, and it's causing permanent damage to your vocals. And that happens a lot with people who are screaming too. You have to scream a very specific way, or you will cause permanent damage, and you'll end up sounding like Tom Waits. Not a bad thing, but
Yeah, not necessarily a bad thing, but I'm just imagining Tom Waits now singing over Canada Songs.
That would be good. That would be very good.
All right. Any other thoughts on Canada Songs before we move on?
People should check it out. At least for the novelty, because like Jones from Indiana is a lot of fun. I Slept with Daughters, and all I got was this T-shirt. It's a really good song. Seriously, all the song names are just so freaking good.
Yeah, and it's like 10 minutes.
It is
like
11 minutes long, so if you have any interest in this band, you have no excuse not to check it out.
The longest song on the album is under 2 minutes. Like it is literally under 2 minutes long. It's 1 minute and 53 seconds.
Yeah. Listen to it on your lunch break. Listen to it while you're in the shower. Or maybe that's a bad idea.
Yeah,
I'm not entirely sure.
I'm gonna end up like fighting the tile on the bathroom wall.
The one place I like actively cannot listen to Daughters is driving, because I find that having it on while I'm like trying to change lanes and stuff is just like there's too much going on in my brain. Like I can't handle it.
I just completed a drive, and I'm going to be doing another one on Wednesday. I did a drive to LA and back, and that's like a 21-hour drive or so.
Mm-hmm.
And I listened to their entire catalog like backwards and forwards, and I found myself driving quite a bit faster while listening to it. One of those things was, shit, I'm going 90. I should probably slow down.
And then you looked at your watch and you realized it was only like 90 minutes that had passed.
Yeah, exactly. And then I realized there was another 20 hours to go.
All right, so Canada Songs, check it out. It's worth it at least to look at the original DNA of the band and seeing where they have come from. Let's move on to Hell Songs then, because Hell Songs is a little bit like Canada Songs. I think more refined. I think the musicianship shines a little more on this record.
Sorry. I was just gonna say, Hell Songs is actually one of my personal favorites, like of theirs. It's honestly like, to me, it's the perfect middle ground between latter era Daughters and Canada Songs Daughters, just because like, even though Alexis is trying out that new vocal style, it has still got that like wailing intensity of Canada Songs. Like he sounds like, out of all of the albums, like without screaming, that's the one that sounds the most like this man is having a complete nervous breakdown. I mean, like the fuck whisperer is, you know, a good example of that, but like hyperventilation system where he's just shrieking "love is a disgusting thing" over and over and over again. So good.
So good. And as you're talking about, like, along with the change in the vocal style, this is the first album where the lyrics are like becoming a real big part, because I'm sure the lyrics on Canada songs are not bad, but you cannot really understand what they are at all. And the thing that is so, I think, compelling about his weird fusion style, that is like he's singing, but it's somewhere in between singing and spoken word and yelling and preaching. It is just like this one of a kind thing, but it really is effective for him to craft these very elaborate songs and write these really dense kind of song concepts in these really really intense packages. And like I think this record is one that I enjoy more and more as I get into it, and get into like all the lyrics and stuff. Like my favorite song on the album, Cheers Pricks, has like some of my favorite Daughter's lyrics, like the part when the really sick bass line comes back in and he's like, somebody pull me out to the town square, put me down like a horse with a broken leg. Like that whole part
Yeah.
that's my favorite part on the whole record. It's so good.
Well, so like one thing I think is really interesting is I mentioned, and I'm so sorry for, you know, going on. I really like the band, guys.
No,
Um,
don't worry.
they his vocal style, like, you know, I mentioned the noise rock influence. It's very David Yao. It's very Nick Cave circa the birthday party, but it's entirely its own thing, taking those influences. You know, like um, Dylan shared a really good quote that compared it to like Danzig. But like I think another favorite a favorite quote about it was like Elvis Presley if he were in hell. I
That's
think
really
it's like a
funny.
really solid description, but like again, it's its own thing. You know, it's David Yao if David Yao was on meth, or like Nick Cave circa the birthday party. Well, actually, like he would Nick Cave circa the birthday party was probably on a lot of stuff, but it's honestly, you know, again, it's so intense and visceral. You know.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go back to something that Jackson was talking about with Alexis's lyrical content, because when I saw Daughters, I think it was a year ago with David,
Yeah.
and at that show I was able to buy a book of Alexis's poetry that was being sold. I think it was like the last copy they had at that show, and I think around this time it's a trend that starts to become more and more synonymous with the band, is that Alexis tries to be more literary with his lyrical writings. He tries to make it, because I think one of the cliches of the genre around the time of Hell Songs was that they feel like lyrics are written by like an edgy 13-year-old in his diary.
Yeah.
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 And so I think Alexis starts to become, he brings in more literary aspects, more poetic aspects to these lyrics. And he does it in a way that's very mature as well, while still keeping this edge and this darkness to them as well.
Well, there's
Totally, yeah. Yeah, I think is able to like walk the line very well, where his lyrics are poetic, like you're saying, but they're not at all pretentious in a way that makes their music feel like I get a lot of profound like meaning out of a lot of the songs, especially a lot of the songs that are on the self-titled album, and You Won't Get What You Want and stuff, but it never feels like uh kind of composed in the way that most like quote unquote poetic like lyricists are, because it is the performance of it is so like raw and primal. Like there's just something about it that's like, you know, that he wrote all this stuff down because it's so elaborate, but every time you're listening to it, it feels like something that he's coming up with every, like he doesn't know what the next word in the sentence is going to be. because he just sounds like he's having a full-blown breakdown.
It kind of reminds me of I remember reading this person who was talking about they made it like a book of poetry based upon like different hip hop artists and their lyrics, and basically they just transcribed their lyrics directly to it, and like it was talking about how interesting it is to read them as opposed to hear them, and like so the author or the person who published it said like it was very interesting and strange to see Old Dirty Bastards lyrics written down like that, because it was like at that when you see them just written out, you're not, you know, really all that interested because of how his delivery completely changes their context. You know, like Old Dirty Bastard has that like insane kind of, you know, as he said, like there's no father to his style, that same kind of like weird delivery. And I know this sounds like completely unrelated, but it really does kind of remind me of that, like the way that you can read his lyrics written down, you go, yeah, these are really poetic and interesting, and then you hear them said and you're like, this changes everything, you know.
Mhm. Yeah, the lyrics they feel really constructed, and I feel like that's something that Jackson mentioned when he was talking about they feel like they've been written out. They're very carefully written, and that's something that again is very literary, is very writerly. And David, what you were talking about with actually just reading the lyrics and not listening to them, when you read these lyrics, you get like styles of I think Southern Gothic in
Yeah,
them.
for
I mean, you get some pretty basic, Gothic. You get Poe, but also I think William Faulkner has been a influence that Alexis has noted once or twice on his Instagram.
yeah.
And yeah, if you just read the lyrics on Hell Songs, but also on the self-titled, you get this sense of uh, I think dread within the setting, dread within just the tone, rather than what is actually supposed to be happening.
And I think that's really well backed up by the music, where especially on Hell Songs, this grindcore style that like they're talking about, they joke about their guitar sounds being like ugly, but like especially on the self-titled and on Hell Songs, you have these musical compositions where the riff and the drums and the bass line often do not feel like they are working in harmony. Like you can tell they're tight enough in their playing that you can tell that they're like very on top of it, but it's also so chaotic that you like can't make sense of it. And the thing that they're really really good at is building like these cacophonous, chaotic, insane songs that all of a sudden, like every time you start to feel like I can't even follow what's going on here, I can't really nod my head along with this riff, all of a sudden they'll snap into like a groove or a riff, or like and you'll just be like, oh, it's like whiplash you get, because you start to feel like they're losing it, but they've never lost it. They're just going in this really chaotic direction and then careening back all of a sudden at the last minute. Like it just the energy that the musicians have together and the way that they play off each other is not like any other band you have ever heard before. And I think on Hell Songs, that energy is like it's perhaps the craziest musically of all of the albums. Just the way the guitar sound and the way that they're playing so fast and furious, like wrestling each other for control of the song.
I think Recorded Inside a Pyramid is probably the best example of that. Like just like especially that opening, it's almost catchy, but it's also again like those notes are so discordant. But like that opening beat to Record Inside a Pyramid, I used to use it as an alarm clock until like my then girlfriend like literally like one day she just confronted me and she was just like, can you please change it or like at least wake up, because I cannot hear that song anymore. Because like apparently some people don't find that kind of screeching guitar enjoyable. I don't understand that, but yeah.
So it has been about as long as the actual album that we're about to discuss. So let's move on to our main topic of the day, the self-titled Daughters record. This record came out 10 years ago, back in 2010, and it, for a long while, seemed like it was the last thing the band was ever going to record. Um, David, I don't know if you know any background into this record, what came before or after the recording.
Well, I remember, it was one of those things where I had sort of fallen out. Like, I never stopped liking Daughters, but I had kind of stopped following them around 2010. I kind of more got into like that era's indie scene movement, so it was a lot of, the kind of post punk era and also like kind of folk indie kind of stuff. Um, but I did listen to it around that time, and I remember thinking it was very strange how conventional is not the right word, because it's not a conventional album. Nothing they've released is really conventional, but it was in comparison to their other stuff. Um, and I remember, hearing that they were like breaking up and just being really sad about that, this band that I had really liked for a long time, and uh, again wasn't listening to them as much, but still was listening to them quite a bit. Um, Finding out that they were breaking up, but it was kind of a lot of bands around that era were breaking up, like the Blood Brothers, who I would say like there's a handful of bands from that era that are like actually still considered good, and I would say like the Blood Brothers is one of them, and like the Locust, and like they also were all either going on what seemed like permanent hiatuses or just breaking up completely. And so it was one of those things where it was like, yeah, I guess that makes sense. It's kind of the end of an era, but still it kind of sucks. But I remember thinking it was a weird one to go out on. Uh, Again, they aren't mellowing, but they're changing. And now, in retrospect, I look at that and I have a lot of love for that and a lot of admiration for the fact that they're so willing to change and grow. But when you are 18 years old and you're just sort of like, oh, it's not as heavy. Um, it's like it's like a little like weird, but again, now it's just a classic album. It really is. It's
You
really
can't
grown.
you can't brood as easily to it and lock
Well,
yourself in your room as easily to it.
well, see, you can see like their early stuff. It's like less brooding and more just like I have so much energy and emotion. I don't know what to do with it. And then like later, it turned into this brooding kind of like I'm gonna stare at a wall and think about how someday I will die. Uh,
They're two sides of the same coin.
they really are. They really are.
But
All right.
yeah, kind of going off of that with what you're talking about with the history of it, there was one quote that I saw from when I was reading the Wikipedia page about this album where he was saying this album really caught up with us. People were getting a little older. The whole band was extremely poor from touring over the years. So life outside the band caught up with us and it became really hard to really do anything. I'm proud of this record just because we were able to make it. It was a real struggle. So it was basically like things were kind of becoming more and more difficult as they were trying to put this record together and trying to make it happen as the years of touring and being in this scene were really like taking their toll on them. And I think you can kind of feel that in this album where it's just like they are simultaneously frustrated but also like desperately trying to take whatever they have left in them to put this record out. And so it's so funny that they finished it and they did exactly one live show in their hometown of Rhode Island and we're just like, okay, we're breaking up forever. Like they tried to keep the touring going and immediately realized that they had spent like the last of their possible energy and patience just finishing this record at all. And so it was very great when they reunited and fans were able to get to see all of these songs live because the Daughters tours post reunion have basically been an almost 50-50 split between songs from the self-titled and songs from You Won't Get What You Want. And as much as I'm sure it was a awful time making this record, I also uh, think that they really pushed through and made something special, because this album, even though, as like I said, it isn't my favorite Daughters album, it's really damn close, and it holds up, I think, beautifully after 10 years.
It's fascinating. Like anyone who's seen a daughter show, like can attest to just how hard they all go when they're performing. You know how
Yeah.
Alexis tears himself up. But if you watch shows from, let's say like 2008, 2009, it's a different kind of thing. It's almost like I know that you could say the same thing about Alexis's performance now, that it's almost disturbing, but it's honestly far more disturbing to see the kind of stuff that they were doing then. It's there's a video that's on YouTube that I watched where Alexis at one point, his pants are down his ankles, as are his underwear, um, and he is just basically like uh, holding himself up with the microphone, like he is just non-functioning, and it's scary to see. It's like he's got this self-destructive persona when he performs, but it's a different kind of thing. Like when you're watching those performances, it really is like, no, really, they are actively self-destructing as a band. And you can kind of, it makes sense that they would be like, it's time for us to just stop, because I don't think that they could have survived with that same kind of energy.
Yeah,
um
Alexis has talked a lot about how he was drinking very heavily during that time, and what I've heard is that the even though he's kept the same general like ethos to his performance style, like when I saw him the first time when they did Our Queens, and while that opening guitar riff is going, he stood right next to Nick Sadler, and he takes the microphone and he puts the entire microphone just fully in his mouth, like slowly lowering it down in there. And like, so he
yeah,
still does just wild off the wall shit. But like now that he's sobered up, it's much, it feels much more like performance art than it does kind of voyeuristically watching someone self combust on stage.
yeah, it's
And
GG Allen for sure, far less
yeah,
GG
Yeah.
less bodily fluids
Allen. Yeah.
is what I've heard has been the big change.
David, when you and I saw Daughters, Alexis was pulling his whatever was left of his hair out, because he had this weird fucking like back mullet haircut to where
Yeah,
like the rest of his head was buzzed except for in the back, which was very long. It was the weirdest fucking haircut I have ever seen.
but it worked for some reason on him. I don't know why.
It did. It
Yeah.
did. But during the show, he was like pulling out whatever clumps of it were left, and also like bashing the microphone against his forehead.
He
Um,
tore into his chest with his nails to the point where he was bleeding at one
yeah,
point. I remember
yeah. Uh, he gives a performance. I'll give him that.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing I really, to bring it back to this album in particular, one thing I really love about this album is it's the first album that they did, and in the latter half or in their entire catalog rather, to kind of use the studio as an instrument, so to speak, um,
Definitely.
because there's one moment in particular that has stuck out to me, and it's just one of my favorite moments kind of in any album, and it's during the hit when the audio channel just drops out, like, and it's so abrupt, it's almost like a kill switch but for the entire band, and it does that kind of like switching between channels thing, and it's this really fascinating thing that they do, because usually they would just use the studio to just record what they were doing, but this is the first time that they're really kind of playing around with mastering and editing in that way. um, and of course they would end up doing that so much more on their next album.
hmm Yeah, I always have to give props to a band who is able to take the engineering process of a record as part of the musicianship.
Yeah.
So yes, let's get into the meat of the record. We lead off with one of the best opening tracks I've ever heard, "The
Yes.
Virgin."
Yeah.
Hell fucking yeah. Like this record, as I was talking about, like comparing it to You Won't Get What You Want, like You Won't Get What You Want is an album that has a lot of tension building. There's a lot of songs that are much longer, much slower, and like slowly ramp their way up and ramp the intensity up over and over. And Daughters is not that. Daughters just throws you in sideways right into the fucking thick of it. There's basically like a 4 count from the drummer, and then it's like, okay, from this moment on, go, and then it's just insanity from that moment forward. Like in my write up that we did for the Indieheads Q2 favorites, when we did our wildcard picks, I talked about this record and I compared this album to the bus from the movie Speed, where it starts and then if it descends below a certain level of intensity, it's like the band will blow up, and you can just constantly feel them like every second they have to be pushing it, they have to be changing it. And The Virgin is such a great introduction into that, just starting the record already going 100 miles an hour. And it's also one of my favorite songs in the album lyrically. Like the Paul Wears a Hat of Fire verse that starts the record off is just one of my favorite Alexis Marshall turns of phrase, and really is, I think, like I think Hellsong's obviously, like, the lyrical style, there's a lot of similarities with the later two records, and the vocal style is more similar to the later two records. But like, I think this album is the one where he really perfects like his particular writing style. And mentioning Paul as he likes to use a lot of biblical name characters, and Paul makes a return on Ocean Song on You Won't Get What You Want. But I love that lyrical refrain, and then the he won't take it off, he won't take it off. It's so fucking good.
I listened to the album right before we started the recording, and it's one of those things where I had a similar thought process where I had this realization that it really doesn't follow the flow of the average album. It's not like an intro track. There's no, like City Song for You Won't Get What You Want really is kind of a how to do an amazing intro track. But here it really is that 4 count, and then just we're in it now. And you don't slow down; you just keep going at that pace. So there's no ebb and flow. It's just a constant barrage, and I mean that in the absolute best way possible. And again, like I mentioned, like they kind of evolved and matured as I did, and it really was one of those things where, like, I think this is the first album that you could say is like kind of their adult album. You know what I mean? Like the artists that made this are the kind of artists who would be more likely to be considered like artsy and avant-garde, as opposed to Hell Songs, where yes, they are that, but they would probably be turned away by someone who considers themselves kind of a music snob. Here they kind of refined themselves to the point where it feels much more mature, much more orchestrated in a professional manner. Not that their early stuff isn't professional, but it just feels tight.
Definitely. And I think it's a lot more ambitious too. Like it's not just that they're trying to go for maximum intensity. Oh, they are, but they're doing more than that. They're trying to have something that is so intense, so visceral, but has like layers to it, and is very carefully constructed and thoughtfully constructed, like we've talked about. And I think this first two songs is just such a insane 1-2 to start an album, because in addition to it being a crazy way to open an album, you get through that first track, and like there's this 1/2 moment where the track stops and you're like, okay, surely they're gonna switch gears and like take a step off of the gas pedal. And then the second song, The First Supper, is like, we're going even faster now, come on, let's go. And the way that this album just kind of rolls downhill like a runaway car with the brakes cut from it is just my favorite fucking thing. And I think the first two tracks are two of my favorite Daughters songs, period. I love The First Supper so much. And I think as you were saying, like this, you're talking about this record being more accessible and a little more mainstream, only in comparison to the ones that came before it. But like, there are hooks on this album in a
Yeah.
way there were never hooks on a Daughter's album before this. And the hook on the First Supper, the all that blood finds its way into a man's dreams, all that blood finds its way into a man's needs, like it's so fucking catchy with the riff on it. And that is something that they had never done before, really, and I think they pull it off incredibly well.
By the way, on the topic of the First Supper, I found out while looking into the album, and I don't know how I never picked up on this. That song makes so many references to the cult movie Ravenous, um, which like I have always loved that movie. It is a weird mishmash of like comedy, horror, western, cannibal drama, um, which makes so much sense.
That sounds like what Daughters would
It,
watch on their tour bus, like after the
exactly,
show.
exactly. It's like it's an extremely dark comedy that also is like a weird western set cannibal horror film, and so I was reading into the lyrics and I was like, yeah, no, this is absolutely about that. Um, and it's so bizarre. It's so strange that they would make a reference to that. Like, yeah, this movie stars Guy Pearce. We're gonna write a song about it. Uh, but no, that's just such a strange thing to 10 years after getting into the album at first be like, oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, so let's before we just fully transition into First Supper anyway, I want to bring up 2 points. The first one is Alexis Marshall is a man who is very obsessed with self-emulation, and
Definitely.
I'm not entirely sure why, but I'm very much into it.
Yeah,
And yeah, and just a second, just as an opening track, I think one of the other areas that it succeeds really well in is setting up the themes that are recurring a whole lot in the record, which is this dichotomy between faith and eroticism and sexuality, and what both and how both of those can feed into each other, and how both of those can affect one's psyche in a way. Um, but yes, let's transition over into First Supper. Any other thoughts on this song, by the way?
on the Virgin or First
Yes,
Supper.
yes, on the Virgin.
Um, I think it's that bass groove on it is it's so simple but so good. That's one thing that um, needs to be mentioned is just how good of a bassist Samuel Walker is. Because it's always like I love playing the bass myself, and there's nothing super complicated about his playing. There is occasionally, but it's so like, for lack of a better term, like groovy. It's just so he slides a lot. He does a lot of sliding around on the fourth fret, or the lowest fret, and it's just or the lowest string rather, and it just works really well with Sadler's like high end guitars. And I think that the Virgin kind of establishes that like immediately.
Yeah, yeah. I think groovy is apt. I mean, you could dance to the song. It might be a terrifying dance, but you could do it, I think.
There are multiple songs on this album that compel you to dance despite every other instinct in your body telling you this is insane, no one should dance to this. But like when the double time drums come in on Our Queens, your body starts moving, like you have no choice in the matter.
There's a term that I've used for that kind of thing where it's like death disco,
Hell
where it's
yeah.
That's
I
great.
want to dance, but it's just so like bleak. But yeah, that's like the epitome of it.
You can dance if you want to, David.
Oh, shut up.
All right, so let's get into First Supper.
Yeah, First Supper fucking honks. It is one of my favorite songs on the record, definitely, and I love how how it, like I said, it takes the energy from the first track and just ups the ante even further and brings in this the riffs that are happening on the chorus of the song especially are just so nasty. It's really fucking good.
And again, lyrically, it starts. I guess it's because at the time I had not watched Ravenous, but now it's a. I don't know if I would consider it a favorite, but it's just a fun movie that if it's on, I will definitely put it on. Um, the line Captain John Boyd crawls out from under the mountain of death, blood running down his throat. So like the plot of the movie is that a guy accidentally um, ingests blood while he's like hiding during the Civil War, or is it he's hiding after a battle where like all of his fellow troops have been like slaughtered, and he's a coward, so he's hiding, and then accidentally some corpse's blood like drips into his mouth, and it rejuvenates him and brings him back to life, and he realizes that like, oh no, I may be a cannibal. And like just saying that all out loud just is immediately like, this is exactly the kind of shit that like daughters would be into. um but again, like, our bunch of heroes are different than a beast when a man sees another man as nothing more than meat. Like the whole point of that movie is that it's just sort of like, yeah, eating people gives you superpowers basically. Y'all should watch Ravenous for sure.
I desperately want to now after this.
Yeah, it's so hard to explain because it really, anyway, I'm not going to turn this into a podcast.
We'll save that for another podcast.
Yes,
Yeah. Um.
our Guy Pearce retrospective.
Yeah. I think this also plays into another theme that Daughters likes to play around with, just in their music in general, is how bodily some of their lyrics can get. Because yes, this is about cannibalism, and yes, this is about a movie about cannibalism, but it's doing so in a way that again feels very visceral. Uh, just the line, uh, you know, crawls out from under the death with warmth of blood running down his throat. Like you feel that in that moment. You get very hot when that line comes through. And
Yeah,
also, no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, no, you're absolutely right. Like how visceral, how there are a lot of bands that try to be violent, and they do so in a way that sometimes feels perverse rather than artistic. But here you have the perfect, with Daughters, you have this perfect uh, uh, balance between the viscerally violent without being exploitative. It's no Cannibal Corpse, where it's just that kind of like cheesy uh, kind of brutality. Instead, it feels real and uh, poetic in a strange way.
Yeah, yeah. Also the line that blood finds its way into a man's dreams, into a man's needs, is just so. I think it's also very perfect for the way that, again, this is seen in, I think, sort of a fetishistic and almost like sexual light,
Yeah,
almost. It's a craving, but it's not in a way that's, again, like you said, it's not very perverted. It's not taboo. It's done so in such a strangely light and weirdly like holy fashion.
there's like a dark sexuality to a lot of Alexis's lyrics, where it's this kind of uh, it's like I'm a big fan of Nine Inch Nails, which I know is a surprise to everyone considering the way that Dylan described me earlier. Um, but it kind of reminds me of the same way that like early Trent Reznor kind of played with sexuality, but in a way that is better honed and more and better crafted. Where it feels like it's alluding to things, whereas Reznor kind of hinted at it. But there is that kind of same view, like that same conflicted view of sexuality, where it's pain and sex and spirituality in a weird way are all kind of interconnected. Um, and I think that um, you see that all throughout their catalog for sure.
Definitely, definitely. Let's move on now to one of, I think this was the only single off of this record, The Hit.
God, I love this
Speaking
song.
of spirituality, yeah,
Yeah.
this is like I think the closest daughters up to this point in their career have come to doing like a story song, and this is one that well, a great example of one of them that you don't really, even though I picked up on a lot of the lyrics from listening to it, like until you read it out the whole way, like you don't really realize like, oh, this is like a whole ass narrative, because it's kind of hard to pick up on how the really dense verses the first time around. But I think he does a really really good job of telling this story about a colonial evangelical person who's come to this dead end town to try to sell them on his religion, and ends up getting strung up in the town square as a result, because the townspeople don't take to him and his religious ways. And so I really really love this track as well. I think it keeps the kind of momentum of the first half of this record going, and I think that when it gets into the second half of it, where the oh well yeah it hit part and those really really sick riffs come in, it is one of the most conventionally slash commercially like appealing moments on the record. I understand why they chose this as the single, even though it is similarly a very dense, very dark, very morbid song. It has that kind of like put your devil horns up, headbang like kind of quality to it that I feel like uh doesn't sacrifice at all like what they're trying to do. Like I think that they're able to, as they've grown as artists, they've been able to incorporate some of those kind of more traditional song structures into their songs very, very well.
Hmm. Yeah, that opening guitar chorus is just so good. It's so
Yeah.
good. And the way that that chorus evolves over the course of the song into this just screeching hook. It's just so it sounds so simplistic, and yet it works just so incredibly well.
I remember hearing that initially when this album came out. So like when this album was being written, like Nick Sadler took on a lot of the actual songwriting for it. Like they would do the same thing with "You Won't Get What You Want." But I remember hearing that Alexis was actually really disappointed with how, in his mind, this sounded like the kind of music that someone else would make, um, and which I think is silly because it's just inherently different from just about anything else out there.
Hmm.
But I see what he's talking like. This is I guess an example of that. You know, as we mentioned, it's kind of the first song that you could call a rock song. You know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
and so, and again, like that is in no way me being insulting to the song. It's just it's really interesting that it is almost like I remember for whatever reason, it's kind of like it reminds me of like when was it Blood Mountain era Mastodon would go full riff heavy and stuff. Um,
Yeah.
and like it's that same kind of like yeah this is the kind of thing that would be played on a still kind of weird radio station, but at least a radio station. um
Yeah, like this is around the time where it's like if Queens of the Stone like if Songs for the Dead era Queens of the Stone Age can still be played on air, this could also probably still be played on air.
right, it would still be one of those things where they would get a lot of complaints about it, but like it would still be like the kind of thing that like a cool DJ would for sure at least try to play. But again, it's inherently daughters because Dylan, you mentioned that Southern Gothic, and this to me it feels almost like Shirley Jackson, Flannery O'Connor kind of lyrics. It feels like
Hmm.
a weird. Um, I don't know why it's not similar to this really at all, but like it kind of reminds me of "A Good Man Is Hard to Find" by Flannery O'Connor,
Yeah.
or that same kind of weird ominous buildup that she uses in that. Um, and then like uh again like almost like the lottery era of Shirley Jackson, where it's that kind of there is something horrible happening in this town. So again, like I think it's interesting how it does sound somewhat conventional, but at the same time, it could never possibly be conventional because they are daughters. They're not some other band.
Yeah. Yeah, I was also about to bring up the Southern Gothic vibe again to this. Um, and you get that right off the bat, you know, it's white man on a white horse, uh, and all of these other motifs of Southern Gothic kind of seep into it. You know, you can imagine this as, you know, this backwater, almost like Western town, you know, in the middle of nowhere. Like I can see the tumbleweeds kind of passing by as the chorus is going, and the sun beating down on it. Like it's such a very visual song as well, which I think lends itself really well to that Southern Gothic tradition.
I absolutely love the line, "The hands are the eyelids of the soul." It's just so beautiful.
Yeah.
Again, like frightening almost.
Hmm.
Uh, and of course, like the chorus, like well, it's a hit. It almost feels like they are like Alexis is kind of commenting on like the nature of the song as well. The fact that it feels like it is there, because like I remember at I think it was at the Dallas show, because I saw them in Austin for the second time when it was them and supposed to be Show Me the Body and Health. Um, and I can't remember which of those shows, but like people kept screaming like play the hit, and he just said no, and then he said fine, maybe later. But it sort of like feels like they did kind of know that this was going to be like their, no pun intended, hit, um, or at least like the thing that would probably be like requested most often at shows.
Yeah, yeah. That line, "hands are the eyelids of the soul." I don't know how cliche this is, but whenever I hear that, I just sort of immediately think of Night of the Hunter.
Oh God,
Oh yeah.
I thought you were going to say Pan's Labyrinth.
Well, I guess that too, but I don't want to, you know, I'm trying to earn cool points right now, David. Okay? So,
Yeah, yeah.
can you just let me live?
I will. I will. I mean, Night of the Hunter is one of my favorite movies, so I'm never gonna like complain about that reference.
Uh
Speaking of movies and theaters, do we want to move on to our next song? Although
let's move on to our
uh,
next song, cuz
our
this
next
one is
song
a
is about
doozy.
a
That's a
very different kind of movie. Yeah, the next song is, of course, "The Theater Goer," which is another incredibly gnarly song, and going back to very clearly the sexual themes of Alexis Marshall's lyric. This is a song about fingering someone at a porno theater, just classic standard stuff. 6 million jaws hit a theater floor. I rest my hand in something wet and warm. I feel you watching from the corner of your eye. If you move closer to me, I won't mind. Is just so funny to me every single time. It's so. I hate to use the word twisted, but it's just like he manages to. I think as you were comparing it to like Cannibal Corpse, like he manages to never feel like he's just being provocative for the sake of being provocative. It feels like he's tapping into some sort of animalistic kind of raw primal thing, and I think this song kind of gets on that because the outro to the song is the it's on your face coming on, it's on your skin, it's on your hand, it's your face, it's your skin, it's your hands, it's your face coming on, but it's the regret that makes the cab ride home such a drag. It's like the combination of these lewd acts where you just feel yourself getting caught up in this primal animalistic desire, and then you realize the kind of human shame that you're trained to feel but you don't feel in the moment because you're so consumed by what you're doing. So it's like when he's in the theater, he's like, if you move closer to me, I won't mind, but then the regret in the cab ride home is what makes it such a drag.
It's kind of like I guess you could say the same thing about uh, Alexis's lyrics. Like they are sexual in a way that is not sexual, if that makes sense. Kind of like I would compare it to, the way like Shame by Steve McQueen is a very sexual movie, but
Totally.
no way do you feel sexual when watching, or like Nymphomaniac by Lars von Trier. It's like you don't watch that going like, oh yeah, you watch that going, oh god, I feel dirty. Um, and I think that like, you know, his lyrics are that, or at least especially in this song, it's a good example of that, where it's like, yeah, it's super super sexual, but it's like not about the sex aspect. It's about um, the shame that a person feels after the fact, you know. And so I think it is that kind of, you know, all these movies, or like in the realm of the senses, which, you know, Dylan and I talked about last night. Um, Another good example of like something that talks about this kind of stuff, where it's just, you know, yes, there's a lot of sex in it, but that's kind of not the point, you know. um,
Yeah.
I think that's very much his lyrical style, or at least the content, maybe not his style,
Yeah,
but
it's exactly what you're saying. It is sexual. It is not sensual. Like when he says, "I put my hand in something wet and warm," that's just gross. Like that does not evoke any kind of pleasure or, like, for whatever reason. Like when I would hear, whenever I was like listening to this song, when I would hear that lyric, it sounds like not like an act of sex, but like just sticking your hand into someone's body, like shoving it into an open wound or something like that. Like
Mhm.
it's so uh, visceral and yeah, exactly dehumanizing.
Yeah, yeah.
he says something, you know, and it's not
Yeah,
even acknowledging that as a human being.
All right. On that note, let's move on to our next song, which carries over a little bit of the same arc, but in a completely sort of different tone. Our queens, one is many, many are one. It's a song about ants, actually. This one.
I love that. I love that.
uh,
Anyway, gentlemen, thoughts on this next song?
this one fucking rules. As I mentioned before, this is definitely a highlight of the Daughters live show when they do this one, because it's just fucking bug nuts. And the ascending like guitar riffs that they do, the like I just don't know how Nick Sadler does that, and the way that they are able to make these songs that are constantly like seeming like they're about to just completely crash and fall apart, and then swing right back into the groove, and then completely crash and fall apart. And then when when this song has like completely battered you around for a little bit and you think you like kind of have the handle on it, that's exactly when it kicks into high gear and the drums really really come in and it just goes crazy. And the whole second half of this song is like the one of the biggest mosh pits you'll see at a daughter. I mean, the whole daughter show is mosh pits from start to finish, but like people lose their goddamn mind for this one.
I think this is the song where I got punched like under my rib cage.
Oof.
Yeah, like into my kidney. I think is this is the song that did it, because it really, everyone just went nuts.
Yeah, after the show, you found me and you were kind of holding your side.
Oh, that was a different wound at that
Oh,
show.
okay, okay.
I got injured at both daughter shows pretty. um, this one, like the one in December, yeah, that's the one where I got kidney punched, and I ended up like after the show ended, just going and laying down like on the sidewalk, uh, next to my friends, where I was just were like, I just need a second, please. Um, but no, I mean, like you're absolutely right, especially like on this song, Sadler's guitar playing, it is kind of uh, it's ascending in a weird way, you know.
Yeah.
Uh, it's something where he's always playing these extremely complicated riffs, but at the same time they are all again, they're on the high end of the fretboard. They're all like above the 12th fret, but like, and he's kind of, you know, not to be crude, but it's almost like he's going so fast it just looks like he's jerking off his guitar in a weird way, like um like, but again, not to be crude, but it's just this really bizarre hand motion when you watch him live, and I've never seen anyone play guitar like that. Um, but here's a really good example of just how fast and how complicated he can play, and how easy he makes it look. You know,
Totally.
sorry about the little comment there.
No, yeah, like you're saying, they're able to play these insanely complicated, complex songs, but play them like they're just thrashing simple three-chord punk songs. Like they play them with the kind of fervor and intensity that usually comes from these simple, streamlined kind of song structures, and they're able to do just crazy stuff because they have mastered this very specific art of ugly guitar sounds, and we thank them for
For
their abilities because this is just a really great song, and I think it segues really well into the next song, which is my favorite song on the self-titled Daughters record, "The Dead Singer."
Yeah.
I think Singer is probably top three on that album for me as well. It's just so good. Um, this one is one that like I put on, like I said, I listened to this album before we started recording, and I put this on twice just to re-listen to it. It's just um, there's a backing vocal. Are we officially on Dead Singer? Sorry, I
Yeah,
didn't.
yeah, yeah. We're officially on Dead Singer. Yeah.
Okay. Because I just want to mention, like, there's the backing vocal there that like is this weird drawling. I can't tell if it's Alexis, but when he is shouting the refrain,
Yeah,
echoes, and it's this weird drawling, almost exaggeration of his style. They're singing along that line,
yeah. It's
and
so good. It's like it really feels like an anthemic like sing along chorus, but like the perverted daughters version of it. Like the back and forth between Alexis and the it's like the if this was like an emo or pop punk record, these would be gang vocals, but it's like the haunted version of gang vocals. Like the dead are literally singing along is what it sounds like.
yeah, because again, he's saying the dead sing along in his typical vocal style, and then that backing vocal comes in, and it's dirgy, it's moaning, these vocals, and it fits the thematic content just so well. um uh and I just love that opening, that drum,
Oh, yes.
that snare kick or whatever it is just so good.
Yeah, this is like I said, this record doesn't do a lot of tension building the way that You Won't Get What You Want does, but this is basically like the closest they get to that on here, where they build up that drone, and then there's the just the drums that just start, and it builds that tension so well, and then the riff that they drop into is the nastiest fucking thing I've ever heard. It's so crushing and heavy, but then the way that they're able to then build on that groove for the rest of the song as they get into the refrains and the outro, and it is firing on like every possible level for a Daughter's song for me, where I think lyrically this song is really incredible, and I love the first verse that intros the song about the little girl with the charm hanging around your neck, the damned are washed at your feet, it's even your dress, there's a voice in your ear, all that stuff is just so good. And the Alexis Marshall vocal performance on this song, especially in the refrain and outro, where he starts going, "You can't let it go." Like he just gets more and more manic, and the way that the various takes of it are kind of being bounced off of each other, and the backing vocals and the main vocals is just, it's my favorite moment on the whole record.
How about Syverson's drums at
Oh,
that double kick or whatever he does, where it's just like it's pummeling,
mm-hmm.
the where the guitar goes like dun 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 dun. It's
Yeah.
so powerful, and he's an amazing drummer, and I feel like we've talked a lot about Sadler and Alexis in particular, but like he's just such a solid drummer, like, and he's so perfect for this band, and I'm so happy that even Sadler's like taken breaks from the band, like aside from of course the hiatus, but like Syverson and Walker, there's such a good rhythm section, and they have been there the entire time. And I think that in large part, yeah, we all think of Sadler's guitar playing as being central to Daughters, but like I really think that those two, the rhythm section, have really carved out uh, their place in music in a very specific way.
Absolutely. Like the rhythm section is so important to making Daughters work at all, because I think their songs are so hectic, and the style that both Alexis and Sadler are going for is so manic and crazy and abrasive, that you really need like a super duper solid foundation to prevent these songs from just descending into unlistenable chaos. And I think John Syverson being able to keep that beat super steady, so in the pocket the whole time, like he's just really, really incredible and deserves a lot of the credit for how good this record is. Especially, I think this is really probably his best work as a drummer is on this record particularly.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
All right. Do we want to move on to Sweet Georgia Brown?
Yes, this is another one that is in that top three that I mentioned. Sweet Georgia Brown. I actually, you know, I was working on some music with a mutual friend of Dylan and I's, Coley Irving. Shout out to Coley Irving, amazing musician. Um, and we were kind of making playlists on like stuff that we kind of wanted to bring in as influences. And like, I threw Sweet Georgia Brown on there because I was just sort of like, there is something about this song that I just want to emulate in every facet of my art. Um, Whatever it is, it's just so, I don't know. It's again, it sounds silly. It's just so intense, but it all is. Um, but I don't know. His vocal delivery, and this is what I was kind of focusing on when I was like showing it to Coley, is I was just like, I want to be like this, but of course I won't.
It is really, I think the thing I like about this song, and like the Sweet Georgia Brown title kind of evokes this, there's something about his vocal delivery and the riffs on this song that make it feel kind of like bluesy. I don't know how to describe it. It feels very like southern rock, but filtered
Mhm.
through the insane twisted Daughters lens in a way that I think really, really works. This song is, it's not one of my personal like top songs in the album, but it has really, really grown on me as I've listened to this one more and more. And I think it's a really great another great there are a couple of Alexis Marshall songs he likes to write where he adopts a different perspective in which he is describing a woman who is like a seductress, a temptress who is also going to destroy you. And I feel like a lot of the time when male artists go for that kind of a angle, it can just sort of feel like misogynist and kind of bad. And I think that he manages to pull pull that off in a way that doesn't really feel like it's just like women are evil demon sex monsters. It feels more nuanced than that, and there's a lot going on in this song, I think.
Yeah, it could
Well,
it could very easily go down that route, Jackson. But I think it helps that again, this song lyrically is just written so well. Like it just has just this innate quality to it. Um, I mean the string of lines, water filled veins and stone cold heart. She's the Medusa to your deep blue sea. I don't know. There's just something about that that just feels so. It's just a quality line, and it's a quality line in a way that evokes, I think, a certain amount of nuance as well. That Alexis is just able to balance this again, the literary and poetic aspects of the lyrics with this just hammering instrumentation with it.
Well, and I think that you mentioned the kind of southern or the southern rock kind of sound to it, and I think even the lyrics I into that almost feels kind of like a throwback to like a southern bluesy kind of rock
Mm,
song.
yeah.
But I think it's interesting as well because I mentioned the sort of like 80s 90s noise rock scene, and it kind of reminds me of those bands that kind of had that influence in them, like um, think of like Nick the Stripper by the Birthday Party, or the Austin crew like Scratch Acid and Jesus Lizard. They all had that kind of weird southern kind of twang at times. Not overtly, but they're kind of this subtle thing, and I feel like you're kind of seeing that here as well. Um, and again, I think it almost makes the lyrics work because it does feel like an homage to these things, but in a way that is entirely their own thing. And I'm like the line, like, she breathes fire, she sweats tar. She breathes, like, breathing fire is almost a cliche, but the follow up, she sweats tar, just kind of contextualizes it in this way that makes it just really creative and strange and exactly the kind of lyric that Alexis Marshall would write.
Mm. Again, it's very visceral. I know we keep saying that on every song, but it's very visceral. It's very evocative of
Yeah,
exactly what Alexis wants to go with.
yeah, definitely.
Any other thoughts on this song before we start to close it out?
Um, it's I think it's just a great example of Alexis's vocal style. Like I mentioned, it's it's a lot of fun. Again, like, it's hard to say that. But one thing that I find myself really interested in is like the juxtaposition of something that's really ugly and really beautiful, and I think that it's uh, this song as well as the entirety of this album just kind of like encapsulate that for me.
Totally. All right, let's talk about the closer now, which is one of my favorite songs in the album, and I think maybe this is talking about lyrical. Like, this is one of my favorite things that Alexis has ever written. And the lyrics of this last song, "The Unattractive Portable Head," are just so, so, so good in the way that they're able to close out the themes of this record and kind of bring it back to this narrative that he's constantly circling back to in his songs, which is not only the kind of horrors and the struggles of life, and but also like uh this how difficult things are, and also how self-destructing and self-immolating that he feels about himself. And I think that really all comes to a head so perfectly on this last song, where it's just this build up from the very beginning, and it's got this double clap and this like gallop to it that is like weirdly danceable. It's but it also you spend most of the track kind of anxiously building as he drawing out this whole song, and then it comes to this insane conclusion, which is like you were talking about, the juxtaposition of the ugly and the beautiful. The end of this album is like weirdly euphoric, but it's not a victory. It's like finally succumbing to exhaustion and desperation, and just ex- the very end of the song, "I want to cast out the wings of desire. I want to be buried in a field of fire. I want to stand up and be 20 feet tall. I want to reach out and feel nothing at all." Like, it's just
Probably
so.
my favorite series of lines in the entire album, if I'm honest. Like, that moment is just incredible. That those series of lyrics.
and the organ that comes in toward the end and the whoa yas are just like it's so like I was saying disorienting in the way that he's simultaneously painting this picture in the lyrics that is so bleak and so despondent, but then in the song it's this like explosion of like catharsis finally at the end of this record. Like I've been listening to this album a lot recently, and as I talked about a little bit in my write-up about this, like for the first couple of months of quarantine I was not listening to a lot of Daughters because I was very high strung and was like seems like a bad idea. But then at a certain point I was just like I can't really listen to chill music right now either, so I eventually just started trying to find music that I could channel my nervous energy into. And I think this record, and especially once you get to this last song, is like such a great example of that, where it just like you take that pent up nervous energy in your stomach and it just like releases it the way that it manages to build up and explode toward the end.
I think you could definitely call this the first of their two songs that do this, because I'd say there's a lot of similarity between the unattractive portable head and Guest House, because
Oh
Guest
hell
House
yeah.
off the end of You Won't Get What You Want does a similar kind the beautiful and the profane, the triumphant and the nerve wracking combination where you feel like it's the entire album is kind of coming to a head, but it's you're both terrified and soothed by it, because Guest House has those sweeping strings, but the entire time it just feels like something is going horribly wrong, but also it's definitely the period at the end of the sentence. And I think that the unattractive portable head is the same thing, especially like I said, like I want to cast off the wings of desire, I want to be buried in a field of fire, like the whole thing feels like it's wrapping it up, and then it just repeats those lines, I want to reach out and feel nothing at all, just over and over and over, nothing at all. um it feels like it's just kind of putting a bow on an already beautiful product. um Beautiful is a weird way to describe it, but I don't regret saying beautiful because I think it's accurate in a weird way.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I would agree with that. Um, all right. Any last thoughts, folks, on this record or Daughters in general?
I've been thinking about this while we've been talking about them. The only other band that I think you can compare their evolution to would be someone like Swans,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
because both artists, and I don't mean sonically, I just mean the fact that they have evolved in such a way that it's gone from the extremely aggressive sonically to less so later on, but without abandoning intensity. It's been a constant throughout both of their careers, and I think that they're both extremely revolutionary and kind of fascinating. And all I hope is that Swans is extremely well respected within the music world, and all I hope is that Daughters will eventually become held up in such high regard, including their back catalog. Because I know that you won't get to what you want. They do have that kind of following based upon that album, but I hope people do start diving into the older stuff, including the self-titled.
Hmm. It's the refining of a certain style without abandoning what the inherent qualities of it are.
Yeah, and like the ethos is a constant
Hmm.
between both artists.
Yeah.
Definitely. I think the thing that is notable about this record is that now listening to it in the context that we are and listening to it in the order that I did, going backward from You Won't Get What You Want, like it's really easy to see this record as like another stepping stone between the old Daughters and the new Daughters. And but I think in what context this record could, like if they had not gotten back together, if they had not reunited, if we hadn't gotten this record that now is clearly the Daughters magnum opus, I think people would think about this album differently, because I think any other band, this would be seen as kind of a pinnacle of their career and their sound and their ambition, and what it really does embody so much of what makes them an exciting band in one uh basically all killer, no filler, perfectly assembled package that just punches you in the mouth for 27 consecutive minutes. It's uh, a hell of a ride to go on as far as records go, but is also managing to twist that really abrasive, like you're talking about, that ethos, that kind of uh, approach that they had to their music from the beginning, and twist that into more conventional, more appealing, more engrossing songs that I think really, really stick with me as a result.
Yeah, definitely.
Definitely. Well, folks, I think that is a really good place to end our discussion there. Once again, David, thank you so much for coming on this episode. It really means a lot to me.
Absolutely, it is 100% my pleasure and honor. It I will talk about daughters with anyone and everyone, but it is especially pleasant to talk to you all to do so. Just thank you, thank you.
Of course, of course. Is there anywhere where the good folks can go follow you? Is there anything else you would like to plug as well?
Uh, yeah, I'm on Twitter at David A.L. Venable. I'm also on Instagram at David A.L. Venable. That also has a link to my art Instagram if anyone's interested in that. But I will say I'm not going to be active on either for a little bit, as I am in the process of moving out of state. But after that, we'll see.
Wonderful, wonderful. Jackson, thank you for the discussion, sir. Uh,
No problem.
where can they follow you?
At horse_jeans on twitter.com. Follow me if you don't already, or don't. You know, I'm trying not to be on Twitter too much these days, but also I'm gonna be on Twitter, so go ahead and follow me.
Fantastic. And of course, our wonderful Nat is at Framing the Pick on Twitter. You can go follow her to your likes content. And of course, you can go follow me, your pal Dill, at Deco Jams on Twitter. I don't know. I don't remember how Maddie usually closes out these episodes. So I'll just say we got more episodes in the pipeline. I think they're still working on more Phil Elverum retrospectives. They're going to be coming up on, I think, Clear Moon in the next episode, but I don't quote me on that one. Um, Other than that, we got some other episodes that we're working on that are in the pipeline. So stick around for those. I don't remember what the schedule is. I'm so sorry, Maddie. Um,
I think we have another. We'll probably have another, not a catch up album, because that's just what we tend to call them, because usually there's like a month in between them. But I think there are some recent releases we can talk about, so we'll probably have another episode pretty soon.
yeah, yeah. So, uh, yeah, that's it. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you next time.